The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence like a blade through silk. Lieutenant Colonel Maverick Reaper Thorne had been monitoring the frequency for 3 hours, her coffee long cold, her eyes burning from staring at the tactical display. The SEAL team's voice came through crystal clear, confident, almost bored. Overwatch, this is Neptune 6. Sky is clear, repeat, sky is clear. No air assets in the AO. Moving to phase line Alpha. But Reaper knew better. She'd been flying combat missions for 14 years, and the sky was never truly clear. Not in this part of Afghanistan, not at this hour, not when intelligence reports suggested something big was moving through the Hindu Kush Mountains. Her weathered fingers traced the edge of her flight helmet, a ritual that had kept her alive through 2 tours in Iraq and countless sorties over the Afghan wilderness. The mystery began 47 minutes earlier when an encrypted burst transmission had lit up every secure channel from Bagram to the Pentagon. No words, just a series of numbers that made seasoned intelligence officers go pale. Reaper had seen the same look on their faces in 2011, right before Bin Laden went dark forever. This felt different, though, bigger, more desperate. The kind of desperate that made 4-star generals wake up in cold sweats. She adjusted her headset and keyed the mic. Neptune 6, Reaper. Are you absolutely certain on that sky report? I'm showing some interesting weather patterns on my scope. Her voice carried the kind of authority that came from being shot down twice and walking away both times. The SEAL team leader's response carried just a hint of irritation. Reaper, we've got eyes on target. Nothing but stars and mountain peaks. You seeing ghosts up there? Ghosts? If only he knew. Reaper had been seeing ghosts for months now. Radar signatures that vanished, engine sounds that didn't match any aircraft in the theater, shadows moving across moonlit valleys where nothing should be moving. Her squadron mates had started calling her spooky behind her back, thinking she'd finally cracked under the pressure. But Reaper hadn't survived this long by ignoring her instincts. The tactical display showed Neptune 6's position as a slow-moving green dot, threading through a narrow canyon 20 kilometers southeast of her orbit point. Standard extraction route, predictable timing, perfect conditions for an ambush. Her A-10 Thunderbolt II banked left, twin engines humming their familiar song of controlled violence. Something was coming. She could feel it in the way the darkness seemed to press against her canopy, in the way the radio static carried just a hint of something electronic, something watching. The war was about to change, and Maverick Reaper Thorne was flying straight into the eye of the storm. Dawn was still 2 hours away when the first missile-locked tone filled Reaper's cockpit like a death knell. The RWR display lit up with more contacts than she'd seen since the opening hours of Operation Iraqi Freedom, but these signatures were all wrong. Too clean, too advanced, broadcasting on frequencies that weren't supposed to exist in this theater. Her heart rate spiked as she broke hard left, dumping chaff and flares in a desperate attempt to break the lock. Neptune 6, Reaper. Break contact, you've got multiple air threats converging on your position. Her voice carried across the mountains with the urgency of someone who'd seen too many good soldiers die. The SEAL team's response was immediate confusion. Reaper, we're not seeing anything up here. Sky's still clear, no visual on any aircraft. But the RWR didn't lie, and those missile-lock tones were getting stronger by the second. She rolled inverted and pulled hard, her A-10 groaning under the G-forces as she dove toward the canyon floor. The Thunderbolt wasn't built for air-to-air combat, but Reaper had learned to make her ungainly bird dance when death was on the line. Below, she could see the SEAL team's infrared strobes marking their position, 8 operators moving through the rocks like deadly shadows, completely unaware of the nightmare approaching from above. The first enemy aircraft broke through the cloud deck at exactly 3:52 hours, and Reaper's blood turned to ice water. The silhouette was wrong, all wrong, sleek where it should be angular, silent where it should scream, moving with a precision that spoke of technology decades ahead of anything she'd encountered. No national markings, no identification transponders, just death wrapped in composite materials and stealth coating. Control Reaper. I've got multiple unknown aircraft. Repeat, multiple unknowns engaging in Grid Square Tango 7-4. These are not friendly birds, I say again, these are not friendlies. Her transmission cut through the static with desperate clarity, but the response from base was nothing but confusion and bureaucratic delay. They wanted confirmation, verification, chain of custody on the intelligence. They wanted her to fill out forms while Neptune 6 was about to be slaughtered. The enemy formation moved like a pack of wolves, 4 aircraft in perfect diamond formation, descending toward the canyon with lethal intent. Reaper had seen this dance before: search and destroy, eliminate all witnesses, leave no trace. Her A-10's GAU-8 cannon could punch through tank armor, but these birds looked like they could outfly anything in the inventory. Speed versus firepower, stealth versus experience. The equation was simple and terrifying. She keyed the emergency frequency, broadcasting in the clear. Any station, this is Reaper with 8 souls in contact, requesting immediate assistance. The silence that followed was more frightening than any enemy fire she'd ever faced. The attack began without warning, a cascade of precision munitions that lit up the canyon like the 4th of July. Reaper watched helplessly as the SEAL team scattered, their training taking over as death rained from the sky. These weren't insurgents with RPGs or even Syrian air defenses. This was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist, something that made her 14 years of combat experience feel like flight school all over again. Her A-10 shuddered as a missile passed close enough to rattle her teeth, the proximity fuse missing by mere meters. The enemy pilots were good, professionally good, with the kind of tactical awareness that spoke of serious training and serious equipment. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated the old girl in the ugly airplane, the pilot they'd probably been briefed to ignore. Maverick Reaper, Thorne had earned her call sign the hard way, and she was about to remind the world why they called her the Angel of Death. The war had found her again, and this time, she was bringing everything she had learned in 14 years of turning enemies into memories. The sky wasn't clear at all. It was full of ghosts, and she was about to become one of them. But not before she saved Neptune 6 and figured out who was trying to erase them from existence. The first enemy pilot made his mistake at 3:54 hours, breaking formation to line up a gun run on the scattered SEAL team below. Reaper had been waiting for exactly this moment, the instant when tactical discipline gave way to bloodlust, when professional killers became overconfident predators. She rolled her A-10 into a descending spiral, using the canyon walls to mask her approach, her Thunderbolt's twin engines singing their low, menacing song. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon spoke once, a 2-second burst that sent depleted uranium rounds downrange at nearly 4,000 rounds per minute. The enemy aircraft disintegrated in a brilliant fireball that painted the canyon walls orange and red, its debris scattered across 300 meters of Afghan mountainside. 1 down, 3 to go, but now they knew she was hunting. Neptune 6 Reaper, sound off, I need a head count. Her voice cut through the chaos as she pulled out of her dive, scanning for the remaining threats. The SEAL team leader's response came back steady and professional despite the hell breaking loose around him. Reaper, Neptune 6 actual, 8 souls all mobile, moving to Rally Point Bravo. What the hell are these things? That was the million-dollar question, and Reaper wished she had an answer. The remaining 3 aircraft had reformed into a defensive triangle, their movements coordinated with the kind of precision that spoke of advanced data linking and shared tactical awareness. These weren't pilots. They were components in a larger weapons system, each aircraft part of a networked killing machine that adapted and learned in real time. Her RWR screamed as 2 missile-locked tones acquired her simultaneously, forcing her into a punishing defensive spiral that tested the limits of her aircraft and her body. The A-10 wasn't designed for this kind of aerial ballet, but Reaper had learned to make her bird do impossible things when survival was on the line. She dumped chaff and flares, broke hard right, then rolled inverted and dove for the deck, using the mountainous terrain to break the missile locks. The second enemy aircraft came at her from her blind spot, emerging from a cloud bank like a metallic shark. Reaper barely had time to register the threat before 20 cannon rounds started chewing up the air around her cockpit. She felt the A-10 shudder as several rounds found their mark, but the Thunderbolt was built to absorb punishment. Warning lights flickered on her instrument panel, hydraulic pressure dropping, electrical systems compromised, but still flying. Control Reaper. I'm taking heavy fire from unknown aircraft. Repeat heavy fire. I need backup, I need it now. But the radio brought only static and bureaucratic confusion. Somewhere in a clean, air-conditioned command center, staff officers were probably arguing about rules of engagement and diplomatic implications while she fought for her life above the Hindu Kush. The third aircraft tried to bracket her, coming in high while his wingman stayed low. Classic pincer movement, textbook tactics that would have worked against most pilots. But Reaper had written some of those textbooks, and she knew how to turn the hunter into the hunted. She throttled back, letting her airspeed bleed off until the A-10 was barely hanging in the air, then executed a flat spin that would have made her flight instructors weep. The maneuver put her nose on to the high threat, her cannon already tracking. The second burst from the GAU-8 was longer, more deliberate, walking rounds across the enemy aircraft's fuselage until something critical let go. The explosion was smaller this time, more controlled, as if the aircraft had built-in containment systems to limit debris scatter. Professional design, military-grade engineering, technology that didn't officially exist. 2 down, 2 to go, but Reaper's A-10 was bleeding hydraulic fluid and running low on cannon ammunition. The remaining enemy pilots had learned from their wingmen's mistakes, maintaining distance and altitude while they coordinated their attack. They were patient now, professional, willing to wait for the perfect shot rather than risk another head-on engagement with the crazy woman in the armored bathtub. Below, Neptune 6 was moving through the rocks like deadly ghosts, their infrared signatures barely visible even to Reaper's advanced targeting pod. Professional soldiers doing professional work, trusting that the crazy pilot overhead would keep the sky clear long enough for them to complete their mission. She couldn't let them down. She wouldn't let them down. The radio crackled with a new voice, calm and measured. Unknown aircraft, you are in violation of Pakistani airspace. Identify yourself immediately or we will engage. Pakistani F-16s, vectoring in from the east, 2 aircraft in combat spread. The cavalry was coming, but they might not be able to tell friend from foe in the darkness. Reaper keyed her mic, broadcasting on the emergency frequency. Pakistani birds, this is U.S. Air Force Reaper, engaged with multiple hostiles over U.S. ground forces. Request immediate assistance. The response was professional, cautious. American pilot, we see multiple aircraft. Which ones are hostile? She looked up through her canopy at the remaining 2 enemy aircraft, still circling like mechanical vultures, and realized the terrifying truth. On radar, they probably looked just like any other military aircraft. The technology was good enough to fool everyone except the pilot who'd been hunting them for the last 10 minutes. This was about to get very complicated, very quickly. The Pakistani F-16s arrived like avenging angels, afterburners lighting up the pre-dawn sky as they descended into the chaos above the canyon. But the enemy aircraft didn't run. They adapted. In perfect coordination, they shifted their formation to put the A-10 between themselves and the incoming Pakistani fighters, using Reaper as an unwitting shield while they repositioned for a devastating ambush. She realized the trap just seconds before it sprang. Pakistani birds, break left, break left. It's a setup. But her warning came too late. The lead F-16 flew straight into a missile shot that lit up the canyon like daylight, his aircraft disintegrating in a fireball that could be seen from orbit. His wingman broke hard right, dumping chaff and flares, but the enemy pilots had already shifted to engage the new threat. The air battle became a 3-way dance of death. Pakistani F-16s against unknown stealth fighters against one battered A-10 flown by a pilot who was running on instinct and 14 years of combat experience. Radio chatter filled the airwaves, Pakistani controllers demanding identification, U.S. forces trying to coordinate a response, and somewhere in the chaos, the calm, professional voices of the enemy pilots coordinating their attacks in a language that Reaper couldn't identify. She used the confusion to her advantage, slipping behind the trailing enemy aircraft as it maneuvered against the remaining F-16. The Pakistani pilot was good, very good, but he was fighting technology that shouldn't exist with tactics that were already obsolete. Reaper lined up her shot carefully, knowing she had maybe 20 rounds left in the GAU-8's magazine. The cannon burst was precise, surgical, walking rounds up the enemy aircraft's spine until something vital gave way. The explosion was contained again, controlled, but this time Reaper was close enough to see something that made her blood run cold. The pilot's ejection seat fired, but there was no chute, no pilot, just a cylindrical object that tumbled through the darkness before disappearing into the mountains below. Drones. They were fighting drones, but drones more advanced than anything in any military inventory she knew about. Autonomous aircraft with artificial intelligence, capable of independent tactical decisions, coordinated attacks, and adaptive behavior. The kind of technology that every military in the world would kill for, operated by someone who clearly didn't care about international law or diplomatic consequences. The surviving Pakistani F-16 pilot was shouting in Urdu, his voice carrying the edge of panic as he tried to engage the final enemy aircraft. But the drone had learned from its predecessor's mistakes. It stayed high, patient, picking its shots while the human pilot burned fuel and adrenaline in increasingly desperate maneuvers. Reaper climbed toward the engagement, her damaged A-10 groaning with the effort. Warning lights painted her cockpit red and amber, hydraulic systems failing, electrical power intermittent, but the twin engines still ran true. The Thunderbolt was dying around her, but it wasn't dead yet, and neither was she. The final enemy aircraft broke off its engagement with the F-16 and turned toward her, its sensors probably recognizing her as the primary threat. 3 of its wingmen were scattered across the Afghan mountains, victims of an obsolete American attack aircraft that should have been easy prey. Now it was personal, machine versus human, artificial intelligence versus 14 years of hard-earned experience. Reaper smiled grimly as she rolled inverted and dove toward the canyon floor. She was out of cannon ammunition, down to her last few flares, flying a dying airplane against technology that belonged in a science fiction movie. The smart money was on the drone, but the smart money had never met Maverick, Reaper, Thorn. The final engagement would be decided not by superior technology or advanced tactics, but by something the drones couldn't understand: a pilot's willingness to sacrifice everything to save 8 souls trapped in the mountains below. The last enemy aircraft came at her like a guided missile, its approach vector calculated to perfection, weapons systems locked on her dying A-10. But Reaper had one advantage that no artificial intelligence could replicate: she was completely, utterly insane. Instead of evading the attack, she turned into it, throttling up to military power and pointing her Thunderbolt's armored nose straight at the approaching drone. The head-on pass lasted exactly 2.3 seconds, both aircraft closing at a combined speed of nearly 800 miles per hour. Cannon rounds from the drone's weapons system shredded the A-10's left wing and punched holes through her cockpit armor, spiderwebbing the canopy and filling the air with smoke and sparks. But Reaper held her course, using her aircraft as a guided missile, aiming for the one spot where even the most advanced stealth technology couldn't protect the enemy: dead center, nose to nose. The collision was spectacular. The drone's composite airframe met 10 tons of armored titanium and lost decisively. The A-10's nose crumpled like an accordion, but the cockpit section survived, protected by the bathtub of armor that had saved countless Warthog pilots over the decades. The explosion lit up the canyon like a small sun, debris raining down across the mountainside in a cascade of burning metal and high-tech components. Reaper's world went black for 17 seconds. When consciousness returned, she was hanging in her ejection seat, inverted, watching hydraulic fluid and jet fuel drip up toward what used to be the floor of her cockpit. The A-10's twin engines had gone silent, finally giving up after taking her through hell and bringing her back alive. Warning buzzers filled the air with electronic protests, but the most important sound was missing. No missile-locked tones, no enemy radar, no threats. Neptune 6 Reaper. Her voice was barely a whisper, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. Sky is clear. Repeat, sky is clear. The SEAL team leader's response was immediate professional relief evident in every word. Reaper Neptune 6, we copy sky clear. Status on you. She tried to inventory her situation. Upside down, aircraft totaled, hydraulics gone, electrical systems failing but alive. Somehow, impossibly alive. Neptune 6, I'm going to need a pickup. The understatement of the year, delivered with the dry humor that had kept her sane through 2 wars and countless close calls. The Pakistani F-16 pilot was calling for rescue helicopters, his voice carrying the kind of respect that came from watching someone do something that should have been impossible. As she waited for rescue, hanging upside down in the wreckage of her beloved A-10, Reaper stared at the pieces of enemy aircraft scattered across the canyon floor. Advanced composites, exotic alloys, circuit boards that looked like they'd been designed by aliens. Evidence of a weapons program that existed in the shadows, operated by someone with unlimited resources and no regard for international law. The mission was over, Neptune 6 was safe, and the immediate threat was neutralized. But Reaper knew this was just the beginning. Somewhere in a clean room facility or underground bunker, engineers were already analyzing the engagement, learning from their mistakes, designing better drones with improved tactics. The war was evolving, and humanity had just fired the opening shot in a conflict that would reshape military aviation forever. Her radio crackled with incoming rescue helicopters, friendly voices coordinating her extraction. But as she hung there in the darkness, surrounded by the wreckage of 4 aircraft that shouldn't exist, Maverick, Reaper, Thorn realized that the sky would never be clear again. The age of autonomous warfare had arrived, delivered by drones that learned from every engagement, adapted to every defense, and remembered every pilot who had the audacity to challenge their supremacy. She'd won this battle, but the war was just beginning. And next time, the enemy would be ready for the crazy woman who turned her A-10 into a guided missile and lived to tell about it. The rescue helicopters found her 43 minutes later, a pair of Black Hawks that descended into the canyon like mechanical angels. The pararescue jumpers who extracted her from the wreckage worked with the kind of efficient professionalism that spoke of countless similar missions, but Reaper could see the questions in their eyes. The canyon floor looked like a war zone, scattered with debris from aircraft that weren't in any technical manual they'd ever studied. "Ma'am, what the hell happened up here?" Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the PJ team leader, asked the question that everyone was thinking. Reaper looked around at the carnage, pieces of composite armor, exotic metal fragments, circuit boards that glowed with their own internal light even after the aircraft were destroyed. How do you explain something that shouldn't exist to people who weren't there to see it? Enemy contact. 4 aircraft, designation unknown. All threats neutralized. The official answer, clean and simple, but Rodriguez wasn't buying it. He'd been pulling pilots out of crashed aircraft for 8 years, and he'd never seen wreckage that looked like this. The metal was wrong, too clean, too advanced, melting at the edges as if it were programmed to self-destruct. The flight back to Bagram was conducted in relative silence, both Black Hawks flying in tactical formation through the pre-dawn darkness. Reaper sat strapped into a medical litter, watching the Afghan landscape scroll past below, thinking about the implications of what had just happened. Someone had deployed autonomous combat aircraft in active operations, technology that represented a quantum leap in military capability. The question was who, and why here, why now? At Bagram Air Base, the debriefing began before she'd even cleared the hospital. Intelligence officers, operations planners, and technical specialists descended on her like a swarm of bureaucratic locusts, all demanding answers to questions she couldn't answer. She told them what she'd seen: advanced aircraft, coordinated tactics, autonomous behavior. But the words felt inadequate to describe the reality of fighting machines that thought and learned and adapted in real time. Colonel Matthews, the intelligence officer leading the debriefing, was particularly interested in the debris field. "Lieutenant Colonel Thorne, we need you to be very specific about the aircraft configurations. Were these modified versions of known platforms or completely new designs?" The question revealed just how far behind the official intelligence apparatus was. They were still thinking in terms of conventional aircraft, upgraded versions of existing technology, when the reality was something far more revolutionary. "Sir, these weren't modifications. These were purpose-built autonomous platforms, designed from the ground up for unmanned operations. The flight characteristics, the tactical coordination, the adaptive behavior. This was artificial intelligence in action, not remotely piloted aircraft." Her words hung in the air like a challenge to everything the assembled officers thought they knew about modern warfare. The technical specialists were already analyzing the debris, such as it was. Most of the enemy aircraft had self-destructed upon impact, leaving only scattered fragments and components that seemed to dissolve when exposed to air. Whoever built these machines had planned for their eventual discovery, implementing destruction protocols that would limit intelligence gathering and reverse engineering efforts. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated the A-10's legendary durability. Reaper's Thunderbolt had absorbed multiple hits during the engagement, and fragments of enemy ordnance were embedded in her aircraft's armor. The Air Force's technical intelligence specialists would have something to work with, pieces of the puzzle that might reveal the source of this technology. The debriefing continued for 6 hours, teams of specialists asking the same questions from different angles, trying to build a complete picture of an engagement that challenged every assumption about modern air combat. Reaper answered their questions with professional precision, but part of her mind was already moving ahead, thinking about the next encounter, because there would be a next encounter. Technology this advanced didn't appear overnight, and investments this large weren't made for single-use operations. When the debriefing finally ended, Reaper found herself alone in the Intelligence Center's conference room, staring at a wall of photographs showing the debris field. The images looked like abstract art, twisted metal, exotic composites, and components that seemed to glow with their own internal energy. Evidence of a revolution in military technology, scattered across 3 square kilometers of Afghan mountainside. Her reflection in the darkened window showed a pilot who'd aged a decade in a single night. Blood-stained flight suit, bandaged forehead, eyes that had seen something that would change warfare forever. Maverick Reaper Thorne had earned her call sign by bringing death to America's enemies, but tonight she'd encountered something that brought death with mechanical precision and artificial intelligence. The war was changing, and she was no longer sure which side had the advantage. Word of the engagement spread through Bagram like wildfire, whispered conversations in the Chow Hall, and coded messages between intelligence officers who weren't supposed to know what they knew. The official story was sanitized, stripped of details that might compromise operational security or create diplomatic incidents. But soldiers talked, and the truth had a way of evolving in the telling. By noon, Reaper had become something of a legend. The pilot who'd taken on 4 advanced aircraft single-handedly and won, using nothing but an aging A-10 and 14 years of hard-earned experience. The story grew in the telling. Some versions had her taking on an entire squadron. Others claimed she'd shot down Russian stealth fighters or Chinese prototype aircraft. The truth was impressive enough, but truth was rarely as satisfying as legend. Her squadron mates treated her differently now, with a mixture of respect and concern that spoke of professional soldiers who recognized something significant had happened. Captain Joker, Williams, her wingman on dozens of missions, approached her during the afternoon brief with the kind of careful diplomacy usually reserved for handling unexploded ordnance. "Reaper, you know we've got your back, whatever this was about." His words carried the weight of squadron loyalty, the brotherhood that bound combat pilots together across all branches of service. But there was also a question there, unspoken but understood. Are you okay? And what aren't you telling us about what happened up there? The afternoon brought new developments. Satellite imagery from the engagement area showed something that made intelligence analysts reach for secure phones and encrypted email systems. The debris field was changing, the scattered fragments of enemy aircraft dissolving into the mountainside as if they were biodegradable. By sunset, there would be nothing left but scorch marks and memories, as if the entire engagement had been carefully choreographed to minimize evidence. But the real revelation came from the technical analysis of fragments embedded in her A-10's armor. The metallurgy was unlike anything in existing databases, composite materials that combined strength and lightness in ratios that shouldn't be possible with current technology. More disturbing were the electronic components, circuit boards with processing architectures that suggested computational power orders of magnitude beyond anything in current military inventories. Dr. Sarah Chen, the Air Force's leading expert on autonomous systems, delivered her preliminary assessment with the kind of clinical precision that made bad news sound like a weather report. "Colonel Thorne, what you encountered represents a technological capability gap of approximately 15 to 20 years. The coordination algorithms, the adaptive behavior, the real-time tactical decision-making. This is artificial intelligence at a level we're still trying to achieve in laboratory environments." The implications were staggering. Someone had deployed battlefield-ready artificial intelligence in active combat operations, technology that could revolutionize warfare and potentially render human pilots obsolete. The question was who had this capability, and what they intended to do with it. The engagement over the Hindu Kush might have been a test, a proof of concept demonstration before wider deployment. Evening brought a secure video conference with Pentagon officials who spoke in carefully measured tones about emerging threats and technological challenges. The faces on the screen belonged to generals and civilian defense officials who were struggling to process the reality of what Reaper had encountered. Autonomous combat aircraft represented a paradigm shift that threatened to upset the balance of power that had existed since the end of World War II. As the conference ended and the secure communications were terminated, Reaper found herself alone in her quarters, staring at a photograph of her old squadron from Iraq. Pilots who'd flown through the worst air defenses in the world, men and women who'd trusted their lives to training, experience, and the indefinable quality that separated good pilots from dead pilots. But none of their experience had prepared them for warfare against machines that could think and learn, and adapt faster than any human pilot. She opened her laptop and began typing her personal assessment of the engagement, a document that would never see official channels but might someday help another pilot facing similar threats. The title was simple: Tactics for Engaging Autonomous Combat Aircraft. The first line was equally direct: assume they're smarter than you, faster than you, and more coordinated than anything you faced. Plan accordingly. The war was evolving, and Maverick Reaper Thorne was writing the first manual for humanity's response to the rise of the machines. 3 days after the engagement, Reaper received orders that came with the highest classification markings she'd ever seen. The briefing was conducted in a windowless room deep beneath Bagram's intelligence complex, attended by officers whose name tags had been removed and whose faces suggested they rarely saw sunlight. The mission parameters were unlike anything in her 14-year career. "Colonel Thorne, You've been selected to lead a specialized flight tasked with investigating and countering the autonomous aircraft threat. The briefing officer, a thin man with prematurely gray hair and eyes that had seen too much classified information, spoke with the kind of precision that suggested every word had been carefully chosen. Your recent engagement demonstrated unique capabilities in this operational environment. The specialized flight consisted of 4 A-10 aircraft, modified with experimental electronic warfare systems and advanced sensors designed to detect and counter autonomous threats. The pilots were hand-picked veterans, men and women who demonstrated exceptional skill and, more importantly, the ability to think outside conventional tactical doctrine. They called themselves Ghost Flight, a name that reflected their unofficial status and classified mission parameters. Captain Viper, Montenegro had flown close air support missions in Syria, where she developed tactics for engaging technologically superior opponents using inferior equipment. Her specialty was electronic warfare, turning an adversary's advanced systems against them through creative application of jamming and deception techniques. She was 28 years old and flew with the kind of aggressive precision that reminded Reaper of herself at that age. Major Titan Kowalski brought experience from the cyber warfare community, a background that proved invaluable when dealing with threats that blurred the line between traditional aircraft and networked computer systems. His A-10 carried experimental equipment that could intercept and analyze enemy data links, potentially allowing them to understand how autonomous aircraft coordinated their attacks. Lieutenant Colonel Phoenix Washington was the oldest member of the flight, a veteran pilot who'd flown everything from F-16s to AC-130 gunships. His expertise was in unconventional tactics, the kind of creative thinking that turned desperate situations into tactical advantages. He'd volunteered for the assignment after reading Reaper's classified after-action report, recognizing the challenge that autonomous aircraft represented to traditional air combat doctrine. Their first mission came exactly 1 week after the initial engagement. Intelligence reports suggested another autonomous aircraft incursion, this time targeting a CIA outpost in the Wakin corridor. The facility was officially non-existent, staffed by operators whose names appeared on no government payroll, conducting activities that required plausible deniability. But the autonomous aircraft didn't care about diplomatic cover stories. Ghost Flight launched at 200 hours, 4 A-10 Thunderbolts carrying experimental weapons and sensors into the darkness above the Afghan-Pakistani border. The night was clear, stars visible through cockpit canopies, the kind of flying weather that made pilots remember why they'd chosen this profession. But Reaper knew the beauty was deceptive. Somewhere in that darkness, machines were plotting the destruction of American personnel with mechanical precision. The electronic warfare equipment painted a complex picture of the battle space. Radio frequencies that shouldn't exist, data transmissions using protocols that weren't in any technical manual, and most disturbing of all, evidence of machine-to-machine communication that suggested a level of artificial intelligence that exceeded anything in American inventories. The enemy was learning, adapting, incorporating lessons from their previous engagement into updated tactical algorithms. Ghost Flight, this is Reaper. I'm picking up multiple data streams bearing 270. Recommend we assume we're being observed and analyzed. Her words carried across the encrypted radio network, a warning based on hard experience and intuitive understanding of how these machines operated. They weren't just weapons, they were intelligence-gathering platforms, studying American tactics and developing countermeasures. The autonomous aircraft appeared exactly where intelligence had predicted, 4 advanced platforms in diamond formation, approaching the CIA outpost with the kind of tactical precision that spoke of detailed mission planning. But this time, Ghost Flight was ready for them. The engagement would be a test of human creativity against artificial intelligence, experience against algorithms, the unpredictable nature of human warfare against the calculated precision of machines. As Reaper rolled her A-10 into the attack, she realized that this was more than a military engagement. This was the opening battle in a war that would determine the future of human warfare, and possibly humanity itself. The autonomous aircraft detected Ghost Flight's approach at exactly the moment Reaper had expected they would. The enemy formation shifted with mechanical precision, each aircraft taking a position that maximized their collective field of fire while minimizing their exposure to attack. It was textbook tactics executed with computer-perfect timing, but textbook tactics were exactly what Reaper had prepared for. "Ghost Flight, execute Chaos Protocol," she transmitted, using the code phrase they developed during 3 days of intensive planning. Instead of maintaining formation, the 4 A-10s scattered in seemingly random directions, their flight paths designed to confuse pattern recognition algorithms and force the autonomous aircraft into reactive rather than proactive decision-making. Human unpredictability against machine logic. Viper Montenegro's electronic warfare systems lit up the electromagnetic spectrum like a 4th of July fireworks display. Her A-10 broadcast false radar signatures, spoofed GPS coordinates, and transmitted data streams designed to overwhelm the enemy aircraft's sensor fusion algorithms. The goal wasn't to destroy their electronics. That would be impossible against such advanced systems, but to force them to process contradictory information that might create decision-making delays. The first autonomous aircraft broke from formation to engage Phoenix, Washington's A-10, its weapons systems acquiring lock faster than any human pilot could have managed. But Phoenix was already executing a maneuver that existed nowhere in military doctrine, a vertical climb followed by an intentional stall, using his Thunderbolt's excellent low-speed handling to create a flight profile that no algorithm would expect from a ground attack aircraft. The missile shot went wide, passing through empty air where Phoenix's A-10 should have been according to every mathematical model of aircraft performance. The autonomous aircraft's artificial intelligence recalculated instantly, updating its tactical algorithms to account for this unexpected behavior. But human creativity was faster than machine learning, at least in the short term. Titan Kowalski's experimental equipment intercepted fragments of the enemy's data transmissions, providing the first real-time intelligence on how the autonomous aircraft coordinated their attacks. The information was disturbing. The machines shared sensor data instantaneously, creating a networked battlefield awareness that gave them tactical advantages no human pilot could match. Each aircraft knew what all the others saw, creating a collective intelligence that was far greater than the sum of its parts. Reaper Titan. I'm reading massive data exchange between hostile aircraft. They're sharing targeting information, coordinating attacks through some